It is a quiet morning on the 15th of June in 1978 on the Scandinavian Raceway. Everything goes as usual. The first fans arrive at the racetrack, the drivers prepare themselves for the upcoming day, and the teams make the cars ready for the first session of the day. But what no one knows at this point is that one of the cars that is being prepared in the pit lane right now is going to cause so many controversials and is going to raise so many eyebrows that it almost breaks Formula One. But in order to understand why this car is so controversial, we first have to talk about a man that is known to a lot of racing fans. Colin Chapman is one of the most successful engineers in Formula One, creating so many revolutionary cars, and with that, creating so many legendary cars for racing fans to still admire. For example, the Lotus 25. And in the mid-1970s, he was just going to create the next legendary revolution in Formula One. Because what Chapman and the rest of the Lotus team tried to do is they shaped the underside of the car in such a way that the air underneath the car would become faster than the air over it, reducing the air pressure under the car and sucking it to the ground, giving the car more downforce and making it faster on the racetrack. Lotus introduced the system on their car for the 1977 World Championship, but unfortunately their car wasn't really reliable that year, and so you couldn't see the positive effects the system had on the car. But in the next season, in 1978, Lotus was not only able to iron out all the issues their previous car had, but they could also design literal Venturi tunnels on their side pods, which meant that the effect of sucking the car to the ground would be even more effective and making the car even faster. And as you can imagine, this resulted in the Lotus being the absolute dominant force in the 1978 season. And as it is so often in motorsport, when one team finds a great revolutionary technology that makes their cars faster, every other team tries to copy the system for the next season. And so Brabham and their chief designer Gordon Murray tried to implement a similar system to their car. Unfortunately for them, they were not able to implement the same Venturi tunnels as Lotus did, because their engine, a flat V12 Alfa Romeo engine, was just too big in order to fit the system properly on the car. Fortunately for them, another team already had found a solution to this problem. But they weren't in Formula One. Instead, they were in the Can-Am series in America, because here, the Chaparral 2J installed two massive fans on the back of their car, which meant that they could create tons of downforce, making the car rapidly fast. They achieved this by powering the two fans with a separate motor. These two fans would then suck so much air from out underneath the car that it would get literally sucked to the ground, creating so much downforce that it could basically run the car at full speed all the time. This is also the reason why it was called the sucker car, because it would literally suck itself to the ground when the two fans were activated. And so, inspired by the system of the Chaparral, Brabham designed their own system for the 1978 car, the BT46. Instead of two, Brabham decided to only use one massive fan on the back of their car, combined with some skirts on the side pods in order to prevent excessive air from being sucked underneath the car. Also, Murray designed the first version of the car with a complex system of clutches, because he thought the speed of the fan would cause problems when the driver changed gears. Fortunately for them, this wasn't the case. And it actually seemed to be that way, that if the engine went faster, the fan also turned faster, creating more downforce, which meant that the faster the car went, the stronger this effect occurred. And so, the now called BT46B was introduced in the 8th round of the 1978 season in Sweden. In the first 7 races before, Brabham performed a relatively okay job, getting 4 podium finishes, but also a combined total of 7 retirements for both of their drivers. But nobody knew how fast this new system would make the car on track, not even the Brabham team itself. Nevertheless, they knew that their system would cause a lot of chalk in the paddock, and so they covered their fan with a dustbin lid in order to prevent interested eyes to see more than they should see. But you could just see how effective this system was going to be the first time they went out on track in practice. So their 2 drivers for the 1978 season, Niki Lauda and John Watson, had to massively send back in order to keep the times as low as possible and as close as possible to the other teams in order not to raise too many eyebrows yet. This resulted in them only finishing in P2 and P3 behind Mario Andretti in qualifying. But as soon as the session was over, the accusations began. Teams and other drivers started to blame Brabham because their car was too dangerous, saying that it would spit out stones and other parts that would lay on the track on the drivers behind them, and that it would be illegal and not allowed to take part in the Grand Prix. But although a lot of drivers and teams protested and said the car wouldn't be allowed to race, the FIA declared their car as legal, which meant that they could actually take part in the Grand Prix. And as you can imagine, the atmosphere that is already not that welcoming when you enter a Formula 1 paddock became even more frosty when it came to race day. But surprisingly, Mario Andretti was able to keep the lead into the first corner, with Watson and Lauda staying in P2 and P3 at the start. And Andretti was able to keep Lauda behind him for several laps, but after he made a mistake, he had to let the Austrian through, which overtook him on a spectacular move around the outside. Unfortunately for Brabham, Watson, in the other car, had to retire with throttle issues on lap 19. But you could really see how dominant that new system on the Brabham was when Jabouillet spilled a little bit of fuel on some parts of the racetrack, which meant that you normally go quite slow around these parts of the track in order not to spin out. And while other drivers did exactly that, Lauda was just able to go through it as usual, seeming to be not even affected a little bit by the slippery surface, which meant that he could post faster lap times than everybody around him. And so it was no surprise that Lauda had pretty much a walk in the park on that day, winning the race with over 30 seconds of a lead ahead of Patrese and Peterson in P2 and P3. And although it was the first win for Brabham this season and the winning champagne must have tasted pretty good, dark clouds were starting to form pretty quickly. Because what the normal fan probably didn't see at this point was that a crisis was starting to emerge in Formula 1, with all other teams in the paddock being worried that the Brabham would be so dominant that it would win every other race this season. And so a lot of teams, including Colin Chapman with the Lotus team, threatened to withdraw the support from Bernie Ecclestone as the FOCA president, who was at the time owner of the Brabham team. And because Ecclestone wanted to keep his position as the FOCA president, which made him basically the most influential person in the paddock, he decided to withdraw the BT46B immediately, which meant that we would never see it raced once again. But just imagine what might have happened if Ecclestone would have refused to withdraw that car from the season. Would the other teams actually have left Formula 1? Would Formula 1 have fallen apart? Would a new series have been formed by the other teams? All questions we will never find an answer to, but it is really interesting to think about. But this story just shows so well how fragile Formula 1 can be at times, that only one car is needed that is faster than everybody else on the racetrack to almost break apart the entire series. But what do you think about this story? Do you think that the Brabham BT46B would have actually won more races that season? And what do you think might have happened if Bernie would have actually refused to withdraw that car from the season? Let me know in the comments down below, feel free to subscribe, and until then, I will see you next time.